Greetings, ladies, gentlemen, and gamers of the jury. It's Alex, a lawyer who loves games. Today we're going to be talking about Deadlock, the mysterious new Valve game, and more precisely, just what exactly it is and if it's worth checking out. So, as of last week, the worst kept secret in gaming is no longer a secret. It's official, the Valve is working on a new game called Deadlock. Everyone knew that a lucky few were playing some sort of beta from Valve, but info had only gradually leaked out about it, and nothing was official. And of course, this is a huge deal. Valve very rarely releases new games, let alone new IPs. And last week, Valve finally officially acknowledged the game. They quietly unveiled a Steam page for it. It's called Deadlock, and they lifted the embargo on discussion and footage about the game. As of right now, the game's in the early alpha stages, and it's invite only, but once you're in, you can send invites to whoever you want, and this is rapidly spread, so it's already reaching peaks of almost 100,000 players. And your boy was lucky enough to get an invite, and I played a match. So, without further ado... So, I've seen all sorts of genres and buzzwords thrown out as to what type of game Deadlock actually is. They're mostly centered around MOBAs, hero shooters, Overwatch, and if I'm being honest, I think a fair amount of the discourse is pretty inaccurate on what the game actually is. After a match, I can very definitively say that Deadlock's DNA is overwhelmingly MOBA, although it is a third-person shooter. I found that Deadlock had much more in common with DOTA than with Overwatch. And I'm saying this as someone who's played a ton of Overwatch, for better or for worse. I would say at least hundreds, maybe even thousands of hours. But I've only played a few MOBA matches in my entire life, and that was over a decade ago at this point. It was Dota 2. So as someone who's played probably 3 matches of Dota in my entire life over 10 years ago and a ton of Overwatch, I recognized everything pretty much in the game as being from Dota rather than being from like a hero shooter like Overwatch. So the gameplay flow is basically the same as Dota. Even from back when I played it, I remember that you are pushing down distinct lanes with your creeps against enemy creeps and players. Your objectives are to destroy towers and eventually the enemy base, and along the way you're going to be farming all kinds of resources in order to buy skills and abilities to build your character. And building your character is the single most important thing in the game. If you've played Dota, and I'm sure a lot of this is the same in League and other MOBAs, you'll recognize, staple mechanics like the last hit, the item shop, lanes, a jungle, the bases. It's very clearly a MOBA at its core. That said, instead of playing mechanically like other MOBAs, like a strategy game where you're microing a single unit, the actual moment-to-moment gameplay is presented as a third-person shooter. So yes, it is a shooter with heroes, but Overwatch, this is not. Overwatch certainly has elements of MOBAs. It's a competitive esports game where heroes rock synergistic cooldown abilities, but I would say that's about where the similarities end. And Deadlock, besides being a shooter like Overwatch and having those same mechanics inspired by MOBAs that Overwatch has, really doesn't share much else with Overwatch and shares far more similarities with MOBAs like Dota. In Overwatch, you don't fiddle with character builds, you don't, buy items and abilities, manage an economy, you're not dealing with creeps, farming resources. You just don't do MOBA things in Overwatch, even though it has elements of a MOBA. Overwatch spawned its own genre, the hero shooter genre, where really it's mostly about shooting mechanics at the end of the day. And Deadlock is way more about MOBA mechanics, like building characters, farming resources, and that's most of what you're going to be doing, and that's going to be the most important thing to whether you're contributing to your team and winning. So I pretty wholeheartedly disagree with all the news outlets and influencers that are calling this like an Overwatch type game or a hero shooter. This is a MOBA through and through. And for evidence exhibit A, I'm going to introduce myself. So I have a strong familiarity with hero shooters like from Overwatch, but I'm completely clueless in how to competently play a MOBA, and that's like even when I'm playing a supposedly beginner-friendly character. So in my first and admittedly only match so far, although I think it was more than enough gameplay to very clearly say what this game is, I played as Abrams, a tankier character who's clearly marked as very newbie-friendly. He kind of looks like a blue Hellboy, and I think his name is probably a pun on the M1 Abrams tank. And I really sucked. I did a terrible job generally knowing what to do, where to be, when to push, and so on, and I very quickly became obsolete as other characters eclipsed my strength through just better farming and character building than me. And I don't think it's necessarily that I was, missing all my shots or misusing my abilities. I just really had no idea how to farm and build a character, and those are the most important skills in MOBAs. I will say, even though I really sucked, and I'm very sorry to my team, we still won at least, and I'll take the win. So, yes, Deadlock is a shooter, it's 6v6, it has heroes with abilities, but I would not classify this as a hero shooter with some MOBA elements. I would classify this as a MOBA with some shooter elements, if that makes sense. I really think that comparing it to Overwatch just completely misses the mark. It really is only similar to the degree that Overwatch is also a shooter and has heroes with cooldown abilities, and that stuff was initially inspired by MOBAs to begin with, so I think this really is through and through a MOBA. And as far as other stuff about Deadlock besides its genre, I would say it's already got a unique and very well-developed visual identity despite how early of a state the game is in, and it's got some really unique mechanics and other elements that should distinguish it from other MOBAs and other shooters. So Deadlock's an entirely new IP. Sorry, Half-Life fans, you're gonna have to wait just a little bit longer for 3. It's got a sort of detective noir aesthetic, and it's set in like kind of a weird alt New York that has robots and all sort of crazy tech, despite never leaving the Art Deco era. The characters and lore flirt with the paranormal through magic tomes and abilities harvested off souls of the dead. And I really like the vibe and the art style. It's somewhat similar to Dishonored, and that's one of my favorite games, so I dig it. Deadlock already has 21 heroes, which is a lot for a game that's not even, I don't think it's really even in beta stage yet. I think this is still an alpha, and it looks really good already. It's got distinctive characters, locations, art, despite the obviously unfinished state of the game from a technical standpoint. Like, there's missing textures and stuff, but it just looks great. Characters even already have lore background pages you can look through. And Deadlock is a shooter. The shooting mechanics and movement feel very precise and satisfying. There's a stamina meter that you're going to be sharing between jumps and dashes that you can chain together. And also from the tutorial, it seems like melee's a big deal. There's even a parry, but I really didn't see the melee in action much during my match. One thing I thought was really fun was there's a rail system where you can clearly choose like by color which lane you want to go to, and you jump on a rail and zip to it. It reminded me of the zip lines in BioShock Infinite, and it made for a really quick game without much downtime. Whereas, as far as I know, MOBAs have a lot of downtime where you're going to be kind of trudging through your lane in the jungle to get to the fight normally. Deadlock also has a pretty front and center whenever you open up the item shop suggested build for your character, so you just kind of click through that rather than going through all the items in the shop, and you can also sub out that for player-made builds. So this does make the act of building your character more simplistic and easier than at least how I remember it being back when I played Dota. With my woeful lack of MOBA experience, I'm admittedly unqualified to say whether Deadlock is a good MOBA, but I can say it's a new MOBA by Valve, who made Dota 2, one of like the OG MOBAs. So if you like MOBAs, you should probably check it out, especially if you also like shooters. I have seen very positive responses online from those in the MOBA crowd, and even with my, total lack of experience in MOBAs, I built a terrible character that just couldn't keep up at the end of my match. I still had a lot of fun. That said, if you're a player who hasn't liked MOBAs in the past, specifically because of all the work that goes into learning to farm and build your character, then this probably isn't the game for you, because you need to do those same, you need to learn those same skills and get good at those just to be competent in this game. Do not go in expecting Deadlock to be something like Overwatch, where you can get by just on like twitchy shooting gameplay alone. And on a related note, I've seen some rumblings online that, Deadlock's going to be this massive Overwatch competitor and it might even topple Overwatch. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Deadlock's in-depth MOBA mechanics, the building, the economy, the farming, they're going to turn off players who want the more pure shooter experience that Overwatch gives. And it's really an entirely different skill set than shooters that's primarily tested here. And sure, shooting skill does make a difference probably for those equally matched with MOBA skills, but if you can't build a character, you're just not going to do well in this game. And you need to either be good at that from other games or learn those skills for Deadlock. I do think Deadlock provides a really great opportunity for players who might have been interested in other MOBAs but turned off by maybe the way they control, or the community being somewhat toxic, or having to deal with players who've had over a decade of experience on them. This is a really great MOBA to jump into because it's a totally new community, totally new game where everyone's picking it up for the first time, except players who've had it for even longer, but only a few months longer. Plus the shooting mechanics make it probably more accessible for players who have played that kind of game and not more PC games. I feel the pull of of Deadlock. I want to, jump on some YouTube videos, learn how to make builds, how to like strategically farm, do well for my team. And yeah, where I bounced off other MOBAs in the past, I really enjoyed Deadlock. Maybe it's because it plays more like a shooter, what I'm used to. Maybe it's the world is really appealing. Maybe just having the like pre-made builds made it really easy. I don't remember things being so easy in Dota, but I really think that there's never been a better time to jump into MOBAs than right now. If you're new, it's certainly going to be a journey. The in-game tutorials did not cut it. I'm going to have to do a lot of research just to get to a competent level. But from playing it just one time, Deadlock seems potentially worth the journey. So what have we learned today? We've learned that Deadlock is a MOBA. It is not a hero shooter at its core, even though it is a shooter with heroes. And from the one match I played of it, I, a total MOBA noob, really want to play more and potentially go on a journey and learn how to play MOBAs. Not necessarily committing to playing a ton of Deadlock in the future, but I'm certainly interested in the possibility. And who knows, maybe I'll end up enjoying Deadlock so much that I go full circle, do the unthinkable, and give the classic MOBAs another shot. Mental health be damned. As to what's next on my docket, if I play more Deadlock, I'll chronicle my newbie's journey in becoming fluent with the genre. I'm going to drop a ranking of all the different mechas in Mecha Break from the playtest I played, as in what just was the most fun from a non-meta perspective. I'm still cooking my Paper Mario review. Let me know in the comments if you agree with me about my takes on Deadlock, and also if you have any good resources for new Deadlock players or just new MOBA players. I would love to see that in the comments too. Like and subscribe, especially if you want to stay tuned on what I'm cooking next. And with that, court is adjourned.